Yes. All right. So we're now out of executive session. No actions were taken in executive session. It is 4:26 p.m. Okay. So next up on the agenda for updates is audit. I gave some of that in the executive director's report. Leigh, would you like to give any color to the 2023? And then we'll be getting together. Once I get through the BEAD and the capital planning, I'll be circling back with Lynn and Darlene. I have a little bit more work to do in the asset capitalization for 2024, and I want to just be able to at least have a good estimate of when that's going to be done, and then we'll get ourselves together and figure out when we think we'll have everything ready for Bonnie to get that started.
Right. So all I have to add is I'm really relieved that 2023 audit is done. I saw Darlene today and we chatted a little bit. I mean, she's Ellie the three of us will connect, but she is on board for getting going with the 2024 audit, and I am too. Mm-hmm. And I'm away for 3 weeks in September, so I'm really kind of gunning for us to push ahead. And Bonnie needs to know soon so we can get on her schedule. But the summer is a good time for auditors usually.
That's good.
Yeah. So anyway, all good in terms of sort of queuing up 2024. And nothing else. I don't have anything else to add other than a big few. And I think the governing board was excited to bring that to conclusion as well.
Yep. And the only other thing I'll add is Lynn is working with Bonnie to make sure that this is now filed in all the appropriate places. Mm-hmm. So I've sent it to VCBB because there's no place I could find to upload it in Amplifund. And now that I realize it, I'm not sure I've actually gotten back a confirmation that all is in order. So I will follow up on that. But she's taking care of that, and I'm taking care of VCBB.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't have anything else to add about 2020 or about audits, either of them.
Okay, me either. So, Finance Committee updates. I gave some of that earlier in terms of the key output of what I'm working on. Is there anything you want to add in terms of color or discussion from that, Lynn or Jeff?
The only thing I would add, Ellie, is that you'll be sending us the modeling that you're doing to us, meaning the Finance Committee, and then once you feel like you have a handle on when you're going to send that, we're going to set up the next meeting. We don't have a next meeting set up yet.
Yes.
We will be meeting sometime in July, maybe.
Yep, that's the plan.
Okay.
Early July.
I would just offer to the executive committee that it's great to have a finance committee that wants to focus on things like our dashboard and so on and so forth. So I think it gives the executive committee the ability to spend and maybe focus attention on marketing and some of the broader business planning issues. And I'm impressed with the other members of the finance committee who've joined us. I think we've really gotten some good expertise that are willing to put the time in for the benefit of Maple Broadband. So,
yeah.
Steve?
Yeah, it's kind of off topic a little bit, but it's on my mind. Come around July, at least last year, the executive committee started taking a look at performance review. And so that's coming up on us shortly. And we wanted to do that process this summer at your request so that it'll be easy for you to work your budget for next year. Now, you said on multiple occasions, first of all, we don't know what the world looks like in 2026, so maybe this is an unfair question, but you had suggested, depending on what the world looked like, you might not be working full-time next year. You might be, you might not. It's uncertain should that influence anything? Are you pretty confident that you're going to have a full-time job next year? How
Depends
do we
on
go
me,
about?
Steve.
Yeah.
I'm doing everything I can to make sure that's the case. Not so much for my own good, but for the district.
Yeah, maybe what we can do is we can just make an assumption for the purposes of the executive committee's efforts to say it's a full-time job. And then if and when, we're in September or something like that, we know a hell of a lot more then than we do now, then we kind of put a pause on that process and then maybe revisit it and make some decisions at that point.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. I mean, we'll know by the time the VCB submits to NTIA in early September. We'll know if we're the recommended bidder for our project area, and if we're not, then we'll know that well in advance of the budgeting. And if we are, we can presume the NTIA will approve, and we can. And again, if something falls through, if we think that we are, and then that falls through in November, December, that gives time. So we always have flexibility. And I mean, the thing about a budget as well is that it's a planning tool. We're required to do it by statute. We're required to do it because it's a good business practice. But if we budget for me at one level and then all of a sudden the floor falls out, there's nothing saying that we can't modify that.
Okay. Great.
Shannon.
I was just going to say that sounds good because from a budget perspective, I'd rather target higher and adjust it accordingly than the other way around. And then my second I guess comment was thank you, Jeff, on information on the other members who've joined since I recommended at least one of them. And if there are any problems, there might be some back channel ways to get them going, but it sounds like everything's great.
Yeah. No, all
Super.
All showing up, all engaged, asking
Super.
good questions. Yeah.
Yep.
Very helpful.
Yep, it's good. It is good. And from my perspective as well, it's great to have a dedicated committee to talk about finance because we were able, when we looked at the draft audit, we were able to actually have the time and the space to go through a whole bunch of details that we would never have done in executive committee. I don't think we would have had to probably do that one-on-one offline. So I'm glad that we were able to do that in a group and get multiple eyes on them so that the commentary was submitted to Bonnie and she turned around was better and more comprehensive. So good job to everyone. Okay. Next item then is affordability. Okay, so on this one, this was something that I'm chasing down that hasn't been a terribly high priority, but I'm putting some effort onto it. So what I had meant here wasn't the affordability research that Matthew's helping me with, but the affordability, trying to find an entity, whether it's a local one or whether we decide that we're going to work with NECA to do the income verifications, which as a reminder, there's two reasons that we would like to do this. Number one is it's a requirement of VCB's long drop program, which you guys saw was formally postponed at 4:45 p.m. the day before it was due, but happily, of course, we all knew that it was postponed prior to that, so I didn't really put too much time into it. But that is a requirement of that program, is that we have a way to identify income eligible households. So we need to find someone to do the verifications if we're going to participate in that program, which I think we should. It's a way to get a lot of our drops paid for. Or the more expensive portions of the drops paid for. And the other reason is that we have both last year and this year after ACP, we have budgeted for subsidies out of our own. We have the budget to provide low income subsidies for qualifying households, and we have never had a way to verify the eligibility of those households. Not to mention we have some that are receiving subsidies from the ACP that we should, by good practice, re-verify them every so often to make sure the households still qualify for the subsidy. So I had a call with, and DV Fiber is in the same boat. They're also trying to, obviously NEKCV is working with NECA, which makes sense because it's their local community action agency. They're also very large and active community action agency, given the size of the NEK and given the level of poverty up there that they're a bit more well-resourced, I think, than some of the others. And they've been working very, very closely with NEKCV for a long time because of the fact that it's much more important for their take rates to make sure that they have a solution for people who are qualifying households. So DV Fiber is Deerfield Valley. They're in the same position as us where they need to find a solution for the long drop program. So we all had a call with NECA to understand their process. And on the back of that, they sent through the process documentation to answer the question of, well, how do we know you're doing it right? And basically they said, well, we do this sort of thing for LIHEAP and heating assistance all the time. This is really just not a big deal for us. But then that also triggered for me, well, if it's not a big deal for you to take what you're already doing for LIHEAP and do it for broadband, then maybe our local guys would wouldn't be a big deal for them, and maybe they would rather do it. But also maybe they wouldn't. Maybe it's, maybe they can't be bothered to get out of bed and they're under-resourced, whatever. So I've had, so Casey from NECA has introduced me to Travis from CVOEO, just as like, peer-to-peer, like, hey, this is what we've been doing for NEK. Are you guys willing to do this for Maple? I'm going to set up a call with him to talk it through, as well as also that wider conversation around just like regardless of who does it, what could outreach look like? How could CVOEO help us? What information and resources are available? All of that stuff. So I want to have that conversation before I come back to you guys with a firm recommendation of which way I think we should go. But want to let you give an update as to where we are.
Great.
Okay. Anything on that? Questions, comments?
I guess I would say if we can work with CVOEO, that would be great, just because they're our agency for the county. So we also might get a better deal as well.
Yep, we very well might. Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. I think the recommendation, I mean, the reason to go with NECA is just to provide, if they have more expertise, they're doing it more frequently, because we simply don't know what the volume is here. And that could be part of the conversation as well, that CVOEO may say, well, we don't really want to commit to this because we don't know if you're going to have like 3 people or 35 people. So if you can give us some sense of the volume, we'll consider doing it. And that could be a reason, for example, to do a pilot, for example, for the conduit program with NECA, and eventually transition. But again, it's a conversation we need to have to understand, are they willing at all? If so, would they prefer low volume? Would they prefer high volume? Would they want to do it at any volume? So I will have those conversations and report back.
Well, and I mean, I think because they could be in a much better position to recommend us to clients,
Mm-hmm. Well, and regardless of who's doing the verification, that's what I want to talk to them about, is to say, like, how could you play a role in spreading awareness of this regardless of who's doing it? Because to some degree, the doing it is a commodity service where, yes, they're getting paid, but it's also a distraction from what they're doing. And so, I don't know if they're going to be jumping up and down to do it, or if they're going to think it's sort of a pain in the butt. I don't know. We'll see. But regardless of who does that kind of commodity transaction of making sure the boxes are ticked to confirm eligibility, I really want to know how we can partner with them on outreach.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're going to be able to help Matthew with locating, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of the objective is to understand where the nodes are, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
CVOEO is going to be critical for that effort.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. So that's it. Sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I think you've set it up well, and it's theirs to refuse, and they may just do that because they don't have capacity. I'm not sure this is like a high profile, exciting opportunity. So
Agreed. Okay, so the VCB revolving loan, this remains on here. I think I gave the update before. At the last VCB board meeting, they voted to take the nearly $9 million for ARPA interest and put that into a match program for federal grants, which could be relevant to us from the conversation we had earlier in executive session. And but we are continuing down the road. It's again, like Bead has taken a lot of bandwidth from me and Krista, who are really the ones driving this from the Vacuda side, because we're the ones who have the most telecom and financing experience. But we are continuing. There are 3 bidders who bid into this RFI, and we want to continue to work with them to understand what funding possibilities exist through philanthropic funds or low interest funds, and what that could look like, and where we left it in the conversation with VCBB and Quantified Ventures was that we would, because there is, Vacuda has some grant funding available, and VCBB also has some funding, but this is not a good time of year for funding from the state with their close of financial year. But the idea was we might contract on a very limited basis to one or more of these firms to go and do some diligence and research to figure out what funding might be available, so that we're not, because right now it's more of like a concept of, in theory, there's like Vermont Community Foundation has said, like there's probably philanthropic funds, but they're not going to go and try and find out, who and how much and what terms unless they have some sort of a contract. So that's where we're putting some time into coming up with questions to figure out if we might want to contract with them to do some diligence to figure out if there's a there or not. And the reason for this being a priority is that the general interest rate situation for revenue bonds and commercial lending is not great.
Right.
And the reason this is important for us is in a non-BEAD world, we still have a universal service commitment. So that's what's going on there. I mean, there's been very little progress because we haven't had much time, but it remains on the agenda so I can keep you guys updated. And then the Affordable Long Drop Program, we gave the update on that. That has been postponed. They have not given an indication as to when it will be republished. The VCB did say in yesterday's Vakuda meeting they don't expect any programmatic changes, just new due dates. So the rules won't be changing, but new due dates. So not much to say there other than, yeah, I really do want to have some sort of a plan around affordability so that we can be able to actually execute on that when it does go out. And then the other thing as well is I've also spoken to London Middlebury because of the people who are sitting in our installation queue, essentially paused waiting because we know that they need conduits and they haven't installed the conduit. We need to reach out to them when the program rules, when it's republished, to let them know that this opportunity exists and to see if they're still interested. And there are, by the way, within this, there are some policy decisions that we are going to have to make because obviously if you're a qualifying low-income household, that's one thing. Above that, we can, the program will allow us to fund some or all of the drop for higher income households, but we have to put some guardrails around that. And we have to figure out what that looks like. So that's one of the things I need to think about a little bit is, how and where do you do that? And then the other thing that the program, there's an earlier draft that had this as a requirement, and I don't think it's in the final one, but this is what I spoke to Krista, and she and I were thinking the same thing on this one, that because people who are participating in this program, if they're essentially getting thousands of dollars of taxpayer funds, because this came from ARPA originally, if they're getting thousands of dollars of public money to essentially subsidize a buried conduit on their property, then obviously we need an easement, obviously we need to own the conduit, and we should also have them commit to a minimum of, say, 6 months of service, which, again, especially if they're low income, if they churn, we wouldn't hold them to that necessarily, but it's more of a psychological barrier because it's just, if someone signs a contract, psychologically, they're less likely to abandon it than if they don't. But, we could decide to make that 12 months, for example. So these are some of the, as we actually get into the details, I'm going to come back to you guys with a series of policy recommendations or kind of ranges and ask you to make decisions like, okay, do you want to have a minimum service commitment? Do you want it to be 6 months? Do you want it to be 12 months? Do you want it to be 2 years? Like, do you want it to vary based on the amount of money that's, that goes into it? What happens if the homeowner puts in, do we want to have a situation where the homeowner contributes some of the cost, where we pay 75 and they pay 25 for middle income? And in that scenario, what does that look like? So there's some devil in the details that we're going to need to get through. So just a heads up on that, so you can kind of be starting to think a little bit about that. And when I present these recommendations or options to you, it's not completely in a vacuum. Okay, parking lots. There's a couple things in the parking lots. One is, so 25 and 26, the network management agreement. This one remains in progress. I mean, there's obviously a gazillion things I've been talking about that I'm working on. And this one remains something that I need to find some time on sooner than later, but it's on there. I did speak to Roger a little bit about it. He's willing to engage. Eileen's willing to engage. So it still remains on there. And the next one, the private roads, roles and responsibilities. That one is also something that I'm going to be trying to find the space to work on because part of the capital plan for this year is another private, is at least, might actually be more than one. But there's a couple other private roads, and so it just makes sense to get that done and get that out there in a template form so it can be really clear to everyone what we do and what they do.
Would you remind me, about that one? I can't remember what 26 is actually about.
So what 26 is doing is we want to have a standard basically a process document and a really clear matrix that shows what we're responsible for and what the homeowners on the road are responsible for. So, for example, we need to have an easement. If there's an existing utility easement, then we can ride on the easement. That's fine. But like, if we basically want to have a section of the document that says, okay, the first thing we need is we need permission from you guys as property owners, either from an existing easement or from the property owner association, or if there isn't one, from each landowner along the road to be able to do this. And if you don't give that, then we can't proceed. And then the second thing is it's the whole conduit situation. If you have a private road that's buried, then there's existing conduits which are could be owned by the homeowner or could be owned by the utility, or it could be disputed as to who owns them. So just outlining this whole situation of like, from what I've been able to tell, usually the property owner owns them. But just documenting and outlining for them, like, here's what this is and here's why this is important. And then, but the conduit would go into the competitor. So like, take for example, Oliver Howe Court in Shoreham. So GoNetspeed is the incumbent telephone company there. Everyone's conduits terminate into GoNetspeed pedestals. So we have put in new mainline fiber. The conduits don't go to our pedestals because they're right next to the GoNetspeed pedestals. So if the conduit is going here, you have to intercept it and make it go over here. And so just making sure that this is all clear so that there's not, because lacking clear documentation, you're going to wind up with people coming to us and asking us questions. And it's better to be able to address these concerns ahead of time and make it really clear. Here's what we do. Here's what you do. Here's what your contractor does. Right. And then here's where, like, if your contractor has a question, they contact Waitsfield and they don't contact our construction oversight because that's mainline. So it's basically just a way of making sure that A, that things are clear, and B, that we're not, either me or our construction oversight, we're not paying for people asking questions that should not be directed to us.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So just a note that some things on there will be getting more attention shortly. And then 24 and 25, we've closed off. So per the policy, they're showing up on this agenda is in strike through. And then from next time we meet, they'll be gone. Okay. Okay. So that's the parking lot. Anything else anyone wants to raise on the parking lot or in general? Steve?
This one kind of circulated in a half-assed way a couple days ago about your vacation coming up in July, and we were going to have an executive committee meeting in that week, and you had suggested perhaps we push out that meeting a week, and I pitched it. Shannon agreed, but we really don't have consensus. So I'm going to tender a motion now that the July 16 executive committee meeting that's currently scheduled, that we relocate that meeting to July 23, 1 week later. Is there a second? Discussion. Okay, all in favor of moving the meeting 1 week, raise your hand or say aye. Excellent.
All right.
Any opposed?
That was unanimous.
That's the best kind. Thank you.
Exactly. Another unanimous decision. All right. And thank you, Steve, for that. Okay. Does anyone have any other business? All right. Well, hearing none, we can adjourn 10 minutes early. How do you like that? We can all get a few minutes left in this beautiful, actually kind of hot afternoon.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Thanks all. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. It's nice to meet everyone.